Mic check 1 2. It is the Y2K collector, and I am truly cooked. I feel like my video game hunting and collecting, at least in this local area, is in its twilight phase because the sun is definitely setting on opportunities. And it's for a reason that I honestly did not expect. It was something that I had suspected very like way off in the distant corners of my mind. Did I think that this was something that might have been going on? But this past weekend has kind of shown me that there is a new participant in the game collecting and game hunting race that I just never anticipated. And I want to share with you guys what I saw and witnessed this weekend. So uh, I was at a GameStop over the weekend, and I walked in just checking to see what they had in stock. I was in the area, and when I went into the store, there was a huge wall of retro consoles sitting on top of the counter. It was taking up basically like two registers worth of space. And there had to have been at least 10 Nintendo Wii's, three Nintendo 64s, about five PlayStation 2s, about six NES consoles, some Super Nintendos, some Dreamcast consoles. I mean, whoever was there, they were definitely unloading all of their broken consoles because, of course, GameStop is still buying broken consoles, and we'll get into that maybe later on in this video. But just to stick with what I saw, so there was this wall of consoles there, and I immediately knew what it was. Okay, there's someone here. They're probably going to be trading consoles in. Maybe they're going to get some store credit. Maybe they're a reseller, and they're just letting go of all of their broken inventory. But as I'm standing online waiting, I see an elderly woman, had to be between, maybe 65, 75. She comes in and she's pushing a little shopping cart. And, if you live in a neighborhood where there's older folks there, you'll know that quintessential, kind of older lady, that kind of grandma looking lady who's pushing a shopping cart. And I realized that she was walking up to stand next to all of those consoles, that those were her consoles. And the worker behind the register kind of told her to just hang on, that one of his colleagues would be there to help her with selling those consoles. And I realized that this older lady was the person selling all these consoles. Now, on the surface, if I would have just seen her on the street, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that this lady would have been in the hobby or business of buying and selling retro video games. But I'm not a hater, man. Listen, I don't care how young you are or how old you are, as long as you're old enough to conduct business, utilize the platforms through which video games are bought and sold, and go to your local GameStop. As long as you're of the legal age to be able to do that, doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are, get it how you live. However, it's just not something that I was expecting. And once I realized that she was the person who was, who owned all these consoles, long story short, I struck up a conversation with her, and it turned out that she was a reseller. And she wasn't just a small time reseller. No, she was a major player in the local area when it came to video games. And talking to her was such a weird experience because she was super knowledgeable on consoles, video games. She knew prices. She knew what the heck was going on. And it didn't matter that she was, an older lady. She knew what the heck she was doing. She knew what she was talking about. And she was very familiar with just the hobby, the industry, and, what all goes into retro games. And we exchanged information, and maybe I'll do business with her in the future. But there was one thing that I pulled out of that whole experience that when I left the store, I realized that I might be cooked. And that's the fact that if there are people who are older, who maybe are retired, or maybe they're just at a point in life where they have a lot more time than maybe someone in their 30s or 40s, maybe even 50s. Maybe you've got a career, maybe you've got kids, small kids, maybe you've got baseball practice and basketball practice and different things, and you got to go to the gym and you're doing all these different things. If you're a person in that stage of life, your time to game hunt is limited. But if you're a person who's at a phase in life where they can dedicate 100% of their time to just buying and reselling video games, she could spend her entire week at GameStop from sun up to sundown, and it really won't make a difference. Now, obviously, she has a reselling business to run, so she's not going to do that. But the point that I'm making is that the sphere of competition feels like it has drastically widened when it comes to the hobby of buying and selling video games. And for a while, I was wondering, man, I was like, man, it's slowed down. You know, I was like, man, it's getting a little bit harder to find good games at the stores. And I realized that because despite Pokemon being very popular, retro video games, especially in Southern California, are still very popular. You don't see it on YouTube a lot. You don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but there are a lot of people who are still very much looking for retro games and buying and selling retro games. And there's a lot of people that are still doing it today. And so the competition is high. It's very, very high, no matter where you are. And if now there's, if there's a new demographic of buyers and sellers of retro games coming in that have ample time to, engage in the hobby and buy games, I just might be cooked because I will not be able to keep up. And so I am just re-strategizing how I'm going to attack the hobby. And one of the ways that I plan on doing that is definitely through Facebook, because it's a great supplementary way of adding games to the collection at a decent price. And so that's what I'm going to continue to do. As a matter of fact, Facebook Marketplace is how I got this copy of Turok. And the reason why I'm showing this copy of Turok is because I got it in a bundle that came with a Game Boy Advance SP, a really clean AGS 101 in the graphite gray colorway, had a protective sleeve, it had an original Game Boy bag, it had about 7 to 8 games that came with it. And Turok was one of the games that came with it. And originally, when I first tried to get it to work, the Turok wouldn't play. It was in pretty bad condition, but I was able to clean it up and I was able to get it to start playing. And surprisingly enough, Turok on the Game Boy Advance is a really decent run and gun shooter game. Kind of like a Metal Slug, not so much in the graphical art style, but it plays kind of like a Metal Slug. You run to the right, you shoot, you get a variety of weapons. Not only are you shooting bad guys, but you're also shooting dinosaurs and pterodactyls, and it is a much different game than what I thought it would be on the Game Boy Advance. Turok, I think, is known for having that first-person shooter approach to the gameplay, whereas this takes it to more of like a 2D side-scrolling action platformer style game, kind of like a run-and-gun shooter. And I'm always pleasantly surprised when I see these games kind of take a different twist when they're launched on different platforms, going from like a console, like a TV-based console, to more of like a handheld console. I think it's always interesting when they do stuff like this, and we've seen them do it with a number of games, but this Turok game is really good. In fact, it's so good that even with this label being absolutely destroyed, it is staying in my collection because I want to play it through and I want to beat it. So this was a very great pickup. Also through Facebook Marketplace, I was also able to get a really clean copy of Fantasy Zone for the PC Engine. Now, some of you might not know, I actually dropped it in a video last month, but I did get my hands on a PC Engine Duo console, the one that comes with the PC Engine console, but then also has the PC Engine CD-ROM attached as well. And so that was a really, really great deal. I picked that up along with like Gunhead on the PC Engine for a really great price. I can't remember exactly what I paid for it, but I also got a copy of Fantasy Zone, which I think is another decent game. I'm gonna have to build up my PC Engine collection, and so I'm taking it one game at a time, taking it real slow. But this was another really cool Facebook Marketplace pickup. Now, it doesn't mean that there was absolutely nothing for me at GameStop. I'll show you guys what I've actually been able to snag from there. The one that I went to actually wound up getting a big lot of Game Boy games. And I picked up this extremely clean copy of Batman Forever on the Game Boy. Now, Batman Forever is probably the worst Batman game on the Game Boy. If I had to rank them, Batman Forever would probably be the worst. Batman the movie would be a tier above it. Then you have Batman Return of the Joker. It's above Batman the movie, but like by leaps and bounds. It is significantly better than Batman the movie. And then, in my opinion, the best Batman game of all on the Game Boy rather is Batman the Animated Series. This version of Batman Forever, is kind of just like a Game Boy version of what you got on the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and that version of Batman wasn't really good either. The way the characters move and kind of like interact reminds me of the way the characters in Mortal Kombat move. It's almost kind of like this pre-rendered, it's almost like they took people, had them like kind of act out the movements on a green screen, and then just kind of like superimpose them onto in the video game. And I think that's what they did with the characters in Mortal Kombat, and it seems like that's what they did with Batman. It's an Acclaim game, and Acclaim kind of had that type of presentation style, especially back in the 90s. And this is just kind of not really my thing. So we'll see how long this stays in the collection, but they did have that. I'm gonna play it through just to see if it is as bad as like the console-based versions of the game. But this was really, really clean. I will give it that. The cartridge is in really good shape. And then they had a little dusty Pokemon Yellow. It was kind of dingy. I had to try and wipe it down, get some of that grunge off. But Pokemon Yellow, of course, this is one that I actually started playing a little bit. So, two solid Game Boy games that were added into the collection. And then I had some condition upgrades. So I have Mega Man X and ActRaiser. ActRaiser, I can't remember if it's ActRaiser or ActRaiser. I want to say like it's ActRaiser, but maybe I'm wrong. But I did have a copy of ActRaiser, and my copy, the label was like kind of like peeling off slowly. So this copy is a much cleaner copy. So I went ahead and picked this copy up, added this one to my collection. Pretty clean copy of ActRaiser. And then a much better label on this copy of Mega Man X versus the copy that I had. So two solid condition upgrades. I don't know why copies of Mega Man X and ActRaiser keep showing up at GameStop, but I guess if you're looking for either of these two games, I've been finding these at GameStop. I found them twice already in the last maybe 2 weeks. So definitely some interesting finds. I have been attacking the website. There's definitely some more stuff on the website available. Yeah, they're still adding stuff. Obviously, the deals aren't as good as, when they were running the buy more, save more, or the buy two, get one. But there are still those onesies and twosies that might make a lot of sense for you. So you guys can let me know, if there's anything, if you've seen anything or found anything that really tickles your fancy. Oh yeah, there's one more game that I totally forgot that I recently found at GameStop. This one was kind of like a surprise to see. But Grindstormer on the Sega Genesis. Now, I was really apprehensive to pick this up. I have not tested it yet, but for those of you who know, Grindstormer has a history of of circuit failure on this cartridge. A lot of people replace the motherboard, and you wind up having to do a bunch of soldering to get this game to work. This game is notorious for flaking out. Like, it just stops working. I don't know if they just use cheap chips or cheap motherboards when they put this game together, but Grindstormer has a history of that. If you go online, you see people trying to sell copies of this game that don't work for $100. I think that's kind of stupid. I definitely wouldn't do that. But I remember when I had my copy before, I actually took it and tried to get it fixed, and it just would not work for some reason. So hopefully this copy works. I'll be testing it a little bit later on. But yeah, this was another one that I found. So ultimately, some solid pickups, some solid titles, Mega Man X, ActRaiser, Grindstormer. These are all legit titles, Pokemon, of course. And yeah, but let me know what you guys think. Have you seen kind of like an influx in collectors? Have you seen things getting more competitive? I mean, we are about a week post SoCal Retro Gaming Expo, and so I would assume that there's still a lot of dust that needs to settle from that convention, especially down here in Southern California. Everybody who came to visit probably just wiped out GameStops and pawn shops and game stores and all that jazz. So they probably came and just ran amok. And so there's probably going to need to be a cool off. Game stores are going to need to replenish their inventory. People are probably going to have to go through and purge their collections and see what they want to keep, what they want to remove. And speaking of a purge, I do have a purge on the way. I think I'm getting to that mid-year point where it's going to be time to start moving some things out of the collection. If you follow my collection long enough, you know I purge my collection a few times a year. Doesn't mean I'm selling my collection. It just means I purge out some games that I just don't feel like deserve a roster spot on the team anymore. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.